Well, then one of the functions that we need to understand clearly is the mechanism of integrity check. And then remember, TCP segments in transit through the network, through the IP network, can be discarded and don't arrive at destination, can be arrived at destination but altered, that is with an error, arrive at destination but duplicated, that is, for instance, if they are propagated across multiple paths, not only one path, could arrive at the destination but out of sequence. For instance, if some segments are transmitted across one path and other segments are transmitted across another path, and the different paths present different times, the different delays in order to be transmitted from one end to the other. Then one of the first mechanisms that we need to implement is the detection of the segments that arrive at destination but altered, that is, with an error. Then checksum is used to check the integrity of the header and the data. It is calculating by adding a pseudo header that contains the source and destination address, as well as the protocol number and the TCP length, in order to be able to verify without a doubt that the segment reached is correct, its correct destination. Then typically, this is the pseudo header that is added to the TCP header in order to calculate the TCP checksum. Then the TCP checksum is formed via the TCP header and the data called pseudo header. The inclusion of IP addresses helps to detect misdirected packets in order to avoid that kind of errors. However, this violates the protocol hierarchy because the IP addresses belong to the IP layer. In fact, and this could present some problems. The calculation of the checksum for IP version 4 is defined in the RFC 793. Another mechanism or function that is implemented by the TCP protocol is the sequence control. Each byte of the data stream is identified with a 32-bit sequence number. The sequence number, the SN, of a TCP segment indicates the sequence number of the first byte contained. Remember, it's not the sequence number of the segment, it's the sequence number of the first byte contained by the segment. Based on the sequence number of each received TCP segment, the receiver saves the data in a position of the reception buffer, thus reconstructing the correct sequence of the byte stream, and can also detect and eliminate data duplication. Remember, this is very important to perform, this sequence number is very important to perform the sequence control. In order to avoid, for instance, duplication of data and to avoid the data that is received in different order. Then in the transmitter side, remember, for instance, in this case, the transmitter side in host 1 that transmit to the receiver side in host 2. Then the sequence number identify the sequence number of the first data byte. but remember, for instance, if this segment contains, for instance, this quantity, this amount of bytes, data length 1, for instance, then this means that in the second segment, in the next segment, the sequence number is not x plus 1, it's x plus this number. And the sequence number of the next segment following this one is the sequence number x plus DL1, data length 1, plus data length 2. And in that way, what is important to understand is that the sequence number are not consecutive. This is not, for instance, 1, this 2, this 3. This could be 1, this could be 1,000, and it could be 2,000. Then the sequence number of the segment following x is equal to x plus the data length. That is, this the next segment following this one is the number, the segment number x plus this data length. Remember this detail. In the receiver side, the receiver receives each segment, and if the checksum is correct, saves the data length bytes, that quantity of bytes of data in the receiver buffer, starting at the position indicated by the sequence number. Then, if even if the segments arrive out of sequence, for example, going by different paths, the data is stored in order. Why? Because even if this segment, the third segment, that is the segment with this number, is received before this second number segment, in fact, in the memory of the receiver buffer, we place this segment first, this segment at the end, and in the middle we will store those bytes between the bytes received in this segment and the bytes received in this other segment. In that way, this mechanism reorder the segments, the data that arrive out of order, or in a different order than the order of that the segments were transmitted in the origin, in the source system. Then, in order to establish error control, we typically use a mechanism of positive acknowledgement. Then the packets are sent. For instance, this packet is sent, and if during the actual transfer state is established, remember, each packet is acknowledged with an acknowledgement, that is indicating with the acknowledge flag that an acknowledged number is sent, and with the acknowledged number we indicate that the data received previously is received without errors, and in that way we exchange the data and the confirmation of the data received. If some data is lost, in fact, the transmitter will retransmit after a while, after what we call the retransmission timeout, we retransmit the packet that couldn't be acknowledged by the receiver. Then with the once this is retransmitted and acknowledge is received, then we continue transmitting the other data, the other segments. And in order to improve the use of the channel, bandwidth, we could implement a mechanism of windows, sliding windows, in order to, for instance, continue transmitting data even if the data is not confirmed. For instance, in this case, we could transmit some data even if the first data transmitted is not yet confirmed with the acknowledgement. We will see some of those mechanisms in detail. And then the so-called sliding window protocol is used for sequence control and flow control and congestion control. And this is an example of TCP sliding window. We transmit octets in different segments. And for instance, if to simplicity, if we already transmit the octets 1 and 2, and we receive the confirmation with the acknowledgement, we already consider that those are the bits, the octets that are already in the receiver of the end system, the destination end system. But perhaps in order to continue transmitting, there are some octets that are transmitted, for instance, 3, 4, 5, and 6, but in fact are not yet confirmed by the receiver. And there are other octets that could be transmitted but are not yet transmitted, and octets that couldn't be transmitted because there is a window size that we need to respect in order to prevent the overflow of the receiver in the other end. And this amount of data in octets that we could send without receiving confirmation is called the window size. And each time we receive confirmation, this window it will be shifted, and we will be able to continue transmitting the other octets. That's why we call sliding window this mechanism. When using the sliding window mechanism, the receiving transport instance doesn't need to confirm each segment. That is, the confirmation mechanism works cumulative. In this case, we don't need, we are not obliged to send a segment with an acknowledgement each time we receive a segment. We could, for instance, receive several segments and after that send an acknowledge for all the data that we already received. The acknowledge segment indicates by the value of the confirmation number that all previous octets of the data segments have been received correctly. Remember, in TCP, the acknowledge number indicates which is the next byte that we expect to receive. Remember, the acknowledged number is specified by the receiver side of the communication. And then the acknowledged number indicates which is the next octet that the receiver is expect to receive, and implicitly this indicates that the previous octet numbers are already received and correctly stored in the reception in the receiver buffer. The size of the window is determined by the receiving transport instance and essentially by the parameters of the size of the TCP receiver buffer, processing speed of the TCP and application process, and bandwidth of the transmission channel. We will see that the size of the window it's that the transmitter need to use is controlled by two phenomena. One is the receiver side with the advertised window, and the other is the behavior of the network and the possible congestion situation that could be implicitly detected by the transmitter, and then the window size will be reduced in order to avoid congestion in the network. Then the first concept that you need to understand correctly is that in order to establish an error control, the TCP protocol implement a mechanism called ARQ, sliding window go backend. That is, the error control is carried out through a mechanism called automatic repeat on query with sliding window and go backend retransmission. That is, the data is sent, and we expect to receive typically the confirmation of the correct reception at the other end, receiving an acknowledge that indicates which is the next octet that the receiver expect to receive, and then the previous octet sequence numbers are correctly received and stored in the receiver buffer. Each segment then has an sequence number and carries data length bytes within the segment. Upon receiving the data length bytes with that sequence number X without errors, the receiver confirms the received data, indicating the next sequence number it expects to receive. Remember, this acknowledged number says that the receiver already received the data from X to X plus data link of this segment minus 1, because remember, the first one is X, the second is X plus 1 until the last octet, that is X plus the DLX minus 1. Then this number is saying which is the next sequence number that the receiver expects to receive. That's why this acknowledged number is equal to X plus this number, the data length of this segment. In that way, and remember that if there is a flow from host 1 to host 2, In a full duplex connection, there is a flow from host 2 to host 1. That's why this sequence number is different from this sequence number. And this acknowledged number is related with this sequence number and not with this sequence number. Remember, that's why I color differently the two flows, the two data flows. Remember, these are the parameters from the flow from host 1 to host 2 that are sent, that are coded, piggybacked the data in the segment of the data from host 2 to host 1. Well, in the ARQ sliding window mechanism, there are typically, for instance, if we compare the TCP protocol with other protocols that implement ARQ sliding window, like for instance, X25 or the HDLC LabB protocol. In this case, the TCP protocol implement an ARQ, an automatic repeat on query with sliding window, but this mechanism perform a dynamic adaptation taking into account the behavior of the network and the behavior of the receiver side of the transmission. Then there are typically two parameters that are variable. One is the retransmission timeout, RTO, and the other is the window size. Then we will see that, in fact, there is an explicit window size that is specified as the advertised window, that is the receiver sent to the transmitter, the window size that could be used, and this is to perform a flow control mechanism. This advertised window size is the window that is the window size that is coded in the window field of the TCP header. But there is another window size that could be used, that is the congestion window. The congestion window is a window that is calculated by the transmitter, but the transmitter calculates this window implicitly, interpreting the congestion state of the channel, of the network. And this, in fact, is used in the congestion control mechanism. And we will see that you will learn, and I will explain you that, in fact, there are two different windows, and each time the automatic repeat on query sliding window use the lower window that is the lower from the lower between the advertised window by the receiver and the congestion window that is estimated by the transmitter side of the communication, of the logical connection. Then typically here we are how the error control is performed by the automatic repeat on query. Automatic repeat on query means that, for instance, the receiver is saying to the transmitter that the next octet that the receiver expects to receive is the sequence number X. Then the transmitter sends the data that start with the sequence number X. But for instance, the data not arrive, couldn't arrive to the host 2, or perhaps arrive to the host 2, but with alterated with errors. Then the data is discarded. In that case, no acknowledgement is sent from the receiver of host 2 to the transmitter of host 1. And after a while, that is called the router, the retransmission timeout, RTO. After this time, the transmitter will retransmit the same data, with this sequence number. And in fact, if this data arrives correctly to the receiver side of the host 2, then the receiver will send an acknowledge, indicating that the acknowledge number is X plus this amount of data length of this segment. And implicitly, this means that X plus DLX minus 1 and before are octets that already were received correctly and stored in the receiver buffer. And then, for instance, the transmission could continue sending other data. Then, in the case one or more segments were dropped or discarded after a retransmission timeout, the transmitter retransmits the segments since the last acknowledge number indicated by the receiver. Remember that, for instance, this we will see with the use of window that after this segment we could transmit the next segments, but in fact, if this retransmission timeout expire, we need to retransmit the data from X and retransmit all the following segments in order to guarantee that the receiver receives all the data. This is an example of exchange in this illustration. Pay attention that in this illustration, the sender is in the right and the receiver in the left side of the image. Then, for instance, this is the sender buffer. We need to transmit, for instance, this data with the sequence 1. For instance, this amount of bytes. And if the receiver side receive correctly those first bytes, we'll store this information in the receiver buffer and send an acknowledgement. But the acknowledge number is in fact 1 plus 1,460 bytes. That is 100,461 is the acknowledge number. After that, then the sender will send the second segment, that in fact is the sequence number 1,461 with this amount of data. But for instance, if this segment can't arrive correctly, for instance, perhaps if we will see that if the window permits that we send another data, for instance, we could send the third segment, for instance, that is the segment that corresponds to the sequence number 1461 plus 1416, that is 2921. But for instance, this segment couldn't arrive to the receiver side, or perhaps arrive but with errors and is discarded. And then in that, for instance, and if the window size permit to continue to transmit more data, for instance, we could transmit the fourth segment that has this sequence number that corresponds to this sequence number plus this amount of bytes. And perhaps when this data is arrived, is stored in this position, and in fact this space in the receiver buffer is left available because there are 1460 bytes that are lost. Then what we could say is that when we receive, for instance, the fifth segment, that we could place this segment in the receiver buffer too, if we receive correctly those data. But we will send, in that case, we will send an acknowledgement, but the acknowledgement will not confirm those packets, only confirm those two packets. Then it sends the sequence, the acknowledged number, indicating that the receiver is expecting to receive this sequence number, and then typically when this sender receive this acknowledged number, after a while, after the retransmission timeout, this segment will be retransmitted. Remember this segment, and in that way, once the receiver receive and place this data into the receiver buffer, the receiver side will confirm the correct reception of all these data, indicated that the acknowledged number is in fact this sequence number plus this amount of bytes. Then remember, this sequence number is equal to this sequence plus this amount of data. In that way, we implement the automatic repeat on query on TCP protocol. Well, then we already talked about this. The automatic repeat on query implement the retransmission using retransmission timeout. Well, now we have a problem. What retransmission timeout to adopt? In fact, the round trip time is highly variable. The round trip time, the time between the data sent and the confirmation received. This time, called round trip time, is the time that the data spent to go and return. Send this data and we receive this confirmation. the time elapsed with those instances is called the round trip time. Then the round trip time is highly variable. It depends if the systems are in the same building, in the same city, in the same country, or in different cities, in different countries, in different continents. And the situation of the network, if the network is congested or not congested, then in fact the round trip time is highly variable. If the retransmission timeout is too long, then the transmission channel is under use, because we need to wait to receive to wait the expiration of the retransmission timeout to retransmit the segment that could be lost in transit across the network. And the other end, if the retransmission timeout is too short, is probable that we perform unnecessary retransmissions. Then, which is the retransmission timeout that we need to adopt. And the solution, the retransmission timeout, is estimated dynamically based on the retransmission, the round trip time. We could measure the round trip time. Each time we send a segment and we receive the appropriate acknowledgement of that segment, in fact, we are able to measure in the transmitter side of the communication to measure the round trip time, and based on that round trip time, we could establish which is the retransmission timeout. Then typically we send data, we receive the acknowledgement of this data, and then we could measure the round trip time. Then when we send data, we could set up a timer or using a retransmission timeout that could be related with the retransmission timeout that is measured. Then, if the new retransmission timeout typically is we measure each time we receive an acknowledgement, we could measure the retransmission timeout. But in order to calculate a smoothing retransmission timeout, we use a factor alpha, a smoothing factor between 0 and 1, typically half, 0.5, and then we could calculate a smooth round trip time in this way, and based in another parameter called the delay variance factor, beta, that is typically higher than 1, for instance, typically 2, we could set up the retransmission timeout using this number, the smoothed round trip time multiplied by beta, by the delay variance factor. In order to understand better this, we could see in this chart that typically in green we are at different times, typically elapsed by the reception of the different acknowledged numbers. we here, for instance, we measure that the round trip time was 40, for instance, milliseconds, and in this time 60 milliseconds, in this time 30 milliseconds, in this time 45 milliseconds, in this time 25 milliseconds. In fact, if we calculate, for instance, this smoothed round trip time using half of this round trip time and half of this round trip time, in fact, is half of this is 20 plus half of this is 30, 20 plus 30, and then we estimate the smoothed round trip time to 50. And if after that we measure that the round trip time is lower, for instance, 30 milliseconds, then the average between or the smooth round trip time will be calculated using, for instance, half of this that is 30 and half of this that is 15. And then no, half of this is 25 and half of this is 15, then this is 40. That is the average between this number and this number. In this way, we would see that this is the variation of the round trip time, and in green, and in blue we could see the smooth round trip time, and after that we, for instance, calculate the retransmission timeout with the beta with this factor, the delay variance factor, in order to establish which is the retransmission timeout. The retransmission timeout, in fact, needs to avoid the unnecessary retransmission. That is, it needs to be higher to the smoothed round trip time, but not so higher that we use inefficiently the bandwidth of the channel. Then in this, in fact, remember, is the, for instance, if beta is 2 for R, then here we are the retransmission timeout that we will use in order to set up the timer of retransmission of each segment that is sent to the network. Then this is, in fact, another aspect that you need to understand. In fact, remember, we have the hosts, the typical host 1 and host 2, that will exchange data. For instance, host 1 will send data to host 2. The receiver of host 2 advertise this window size, W, and that means that, in fact, the transmitter is able to send W bytes since the last acknowledged number. That is, where the transmitter side of the connection could send data until how many, that quantity of bytes. If we would like to completely use the bandwidth of the channel, we need to receive the acknowledgement of the first segment of data after this time called the round trip time. Then, in fact, typically the throughput will be maximum this window size divided by this round trip time. Then the window will be renewed. That is a sliding window concept. Renewed in order to we could send from this sequence number W bytes. But if we want to continue to send other bytes, we need to receive the acknowledge of the first bytes in order to continue to send more bytes, and then the window will slide, and we will be use all the bandwidth of the network, of the channel. Then remember, the size of the window is related with the throughput that the transmitter could send data to the receiver. Then we will see that there are two mechanisms different that could be implemented. One mechanism is the window is the amount of bytes that the transmitter could send without overflow the receiver buffer. This is what is called flow control. Or we could use less bytes, a window of less bytes than the advertised window, in order to avoid the overflow of the queues in the network. Remember, in a packet switching network, there are several queues. Then see if the queues grow too much, we could lost packets data. In that scenario, we will see that there is a congestion. In order to avoid the congestion, we need to use a window, the transmitter side, a window lower than the advertised window by the receiver. Remember that difference. But what is now very important is that you associate the window size used by the transmitter with the throughput that the transmitter could send data to the other end system. Then here we need to talk about a particular concept, the bandwidth delay product. The bandwidth delay product. Then the bandwidth is typically expressed in throughput, and the delay in seconds or milliseconds. This is time, and this is throughput, the bandwidth delay product. Then a certain amount of time is required for the transmission of data segments and confirmation acknowledgement. It was we called the round trip time. The time depends on the bandwidth of the transmission channel measured in bits per second and that data size. The window size can be displayed as follows. This is the window size. This is the number of segments, and this is the size of the segments. But remember, the segments would have a maximum size indicated by the maximum segment size. That is typically an option that could be exchanged in the setup of the connection. Then there is a relation between the number of segments and the maximum size of each segment, and this is in fact the window size. Now, at the beginning, the transmission We will see that this in the slow start in the slow start mechanism. The window is one is set up to one segment typically. That segment could have MSS bytes. In fact, the window size is 1 MSS. This means that only one data segment is sent and waited for the acknowledged segment. That is the confirmation of the first maximum, the first segment. The time difference between transmission and reception of the confirmation is called the round trip time. After receiving the acknowledged segment confirmation, the window size is set to two maximum to two segments, and in that way, the window size is incremented each time the transmitter receives the acknowledgements from the receiver. At some point, we reach the state in which the transmission system is full with data segments and acknowledged segments. We get the so-called steady state of a TCP connection. That is maximum rate, typically. Then, in this scenario, in this situation, we need to know or to establish the capacity of the transmission channel. This capacity is identified with this parameter called capacity bandwidth delay product. And why bandwidth delay product between? Because it's the result of the bandwidth, that is the speed of the channel, the throughput of the channel, and the round trip time across this path, across this channel between the two end systems. The multiplication of those parameters, that is the bandwidth and the delay, we obtain what is called the optimal window size. The optimal window size then is the window that we need to use in order to transmit and to use we need to use to completely full the channel and communicate at that rate the communication between the processes, the inter-process communication. The CBD, the capacity bandwidth delay product, is called the bandwidth delay product. Their size depends on the round trip time value and the data rate, the transmission rate across the path between the end systems. If you know the round trip time and the transmission rate of the channel, you can determine the window size to achieve the maximum possible throughput. That is, full utilization of the bandwidth of the channel between the end systems. For instance, this is an example. If we had round trip time of 80 milliseconds between two end systems, and we could transfer data at the rate of 1 megabit per second, then the bandwidth delay product is 1 megabit per second multiplied by 80 milliseconds, that is 0.08 seconds, that is equal to 80,000 bits, that is 10,000 bytes, and to achieve the maximum load of the transmission channel, the value window size would have to be set to this size. That is, if the connection, the TCP connection, could establish a window size of 10 kilobytes, this channel will be used fully. That is, we could reach the full utilization of the bandwidth. But for channels with high data rates, that is, high data rates, for instance, bigger than 1 megabit per second, and large round trip time, for instance, bigger than 10 milliseconds or 100 milliseconds, the maximum window size of the TCP header reaches its limits. That is, which is the limit of the window. The window is coded with 16 bits. Then 2 to 16 bytes is the maximum length of the window. That is 64K bytes. Remember that this notation is this one here. 1K byte is in fact 2 to 10 bytes. That is 1024 bytes, not 1000 bytes. It's a simplification in the notation. Such channels with higher data rates and high round trip times are also called long fat networks, or LFN. To solve this problem, the TCP option window scale specified in the RFC 1323 was introduced in 1992. The factor that could be used is a factor to use a large window, larger than 16 bits, and we could use a factor of 14 bits, additional 14 bits. That is a window of 30 bits. Then 2 to 30 bytes. That is 1 gigabyte. Remember, this notation is in fact 1 gigabyte in this with this notation means 2 to 30 bytes. Then we will see congestion monitor in the next video, but it's important that you understood correctly the concepts of the window size, for instance, in this case, the calculation of the retransmission timeout, because is dynamically calculated using the round trip time, and the concept of the error control with the send of data, sequence data, and then the data is sent with sequence number and confirmed with the acknowledged numbers. Then now we will continue in the next video with the explanation of the congestion monitoring.